In this video, we'll look at the basic anatomy of coronary supply of the heart, and applying that knowledge, we will theoretically learn to locate where the MI is located, which is the culprit artery, and we will basically in this video we will be learning just theoretically. In next video, I will be showing some ECGs through the recording through the computer, and we will learn in that. But basic theoretical funda you need to clear it out from this video. So let's start from let's say left coronary artery. So there will be your left coronary artery coming from behind. So let me draw it dotted, and now here there will be left circumflex artery going behind. Behind I am showing dotted, and it will come to the posterior part, and here you have the left anterior descending artery. So this is the left anterior descending artery, which mainly supplies the septum, anterior septum, compromising of the septum, part of right ventricle, and most of the part of left anterior wall of the left ventricle. So this is your LAD, this is your circumflex artery. So the circumflex artery is going backward. So this is the circumflex artery, it is going backward, and this is the LAD, left anterior descending artery. And there are certain septal branches from the LAD and diagonal branches. Okay, so what you can find it out is, so this is your, again this is your LAD, and this is the backward of that, and these are the septal branches, and these are the diagonal branches. So this is your LAD, this is your left circumflex artery, and that is the backside part. And likewise, right coronary artery comes like this, and there you can see the acute marginal, and it goes behind, and it mostly forms the posterior septum, supplying the posterior part and inferior part. So you can see the right border of the heart is supplied by right coronary artery, left border of the heart is supplied by the left coronary artery, anterior wall is supplied by the left coronary artery, and posterior is supplied. Posterior is most of the cases, it is, suppose this is the posterior wall of my heart, mostly it is supplied from the right coronary artery, which goes behind, and in some cases circumflex artery, which also goes behind, also contributes to the posterior wall. Similarly, inferior wall, so this is the right, so this is right coronary artery, it goes behind and it comes like this way down, and this is the right coronary artery. So in case of 80% of the cases, right coronary dominant artery will be there, and inferior wall will be supplied by right coronary artery. But in case of 15%, it can be like left coronary artery dominant, so inferior can be supplied by them. In 5% of the cases, there can be co-dominant also, so both right coronary artery and left coronary artery also can supply. But basic understanding, basic mnemonics, that what I would like to give to you is that, suppose this is RCA. So right coronary artery supplies the right ventricle. So RIP, I for inferior wall, and P for posterior wall, RCA. In case of left coronary artery, the mnemonics is SLAP. S for septal, because as we have already discussed, from left anterior descending, septal branches are given off. And L for again lateral. Lateral means this part, left side of the lateral. A for anterior, which is mostly the left ventricle, and another P is possibly inferior. So this is generally very low in number. So if there is septal pathology, then which is the culprit artery? Left coronary artery in most of the cases, but in some cases right coronary artery, but in most of the cases septal is just LCA. Lateral, again lateral circumflex. Anterior, LAD supply, possibly inferior in case of codominant or left coronary artery dominant. In right coronary artery, right ventricle is this part of right ventricle, right part, right border, all they are supplied by right coronary artery. Inferior part, mostly in case of right dominant artery, the inferior part of the heart, and posterior, that is back part. So this is the basic funda. So in any region, if there is any pathology, then you can think that this artery can be blocked in case of especially MIs. Now we will be discussing, first we will be discussing about LCA, and then we will be discussing on RCA. So in LCA, as I have already told, there is one S1, S2 and D1, D2. This is septal branch and this is diagonal branch. So if there is occlusion, so there is occlusion below, okay, let's say occlusion above S1. So occlusion above S1 and D1. So suppose if there is occlusion somewhere here, or it could be here, isn't it? In this case, if occlusion is here, suppose now the blood supply is cut off here, then what will be consequence? The LAD will be blocked. When LAD will be blocked, what will happen? The septal part won't be supplied and the anterior part of the heart won't be supplied. So the lesion will be found mainly on the septal region and anterior region. Is it clear? Because LAD supplies the septal and the anterior part, which we discussed already. So in case of MI, above the occlusion above S1 and D1, so in case of septal and anterior, okay, till now it's clear. Okay, now we have already talked where to look in case of septal, B1 and B2. Where to look in case of anterior wall, B3, B4. So the basic pathology will be found in B1, B2, B3 and B4. So what will be the pathology then? There could be ST elevation and T wave upright, or there could be ST deprivation, ST might be like depressed and T wave inversion. But in case of acute MI, in case of acute phase of MI, there will be ST elevation and T wave will be upright. So what I mean to say is that, suppose now I will be drawing the electrical activity. So this is your V1. In V1, so this is your atria, here is your P wave. Now it will be like this. So you see here, you take this PR as an isoelectric line. So if I draw straight line from here, this is our isoelectric line, and you see here the ST segment, you find it is elevated, isn't it? And this elevation must be greater than 1 mm. Okay, so in V1, V2, V3 and V4 you will be finding like these changes. So in case of septal and anterior leads, you will be finding V1, V2, V3 and V4, they will be having ST elevation and T wave upright. However, when suppose the block is right here, a little bit above the bifurcation from the left circumflex artery, or S1 above S1 and D1 but little bit higher, then there can be a certain degree of lateral occlusion also. So there can be certain degree of lateral occlusion also. So in case of lateral occlusion, what we have discussed is that we need to look at B5 and B6, isn't it? So in B5 and V6 also you can find this. So in V5 and V6, if the occlusion is a bit higher, then the ST segment will be elevated. Here you see the ST segment elevated and upright T wave, isn't it? So the basic funda is this. So in case of V1, V2, V3, V4, mainly septal and anterior, and if also involves the lateral part, then it is B5 and B6. So did you get my point? Okay, till now we are clear. However, we also discussed already, like when this is lead I, lateral part, and this is AVL also, isn't it? So these two are also they are also looking the heart from the lateral part. So when left circumference artery is blocked, or the higher level lesion of the left coronary artery is there, then ST segment elevation and upright T wave can be found in these leads also, AVL and I, along with B5 and B6. So is it clear? So in septal, V1 and V2, in case of anterior, V3 and V4, in case of lateral, V5, V6, I and AVL. Is it clear so far? Okay. Now another extra piece of information which I would like to provide is that when you find ST segment elevation and T wave upright in V1, V2, V3, V4, let's say septal and anterior, then there is another phenomenon which is called inverse reciprocal relationship. That is, suppose when you find ST segment elevation in anterior wall or lateral wall or septum, then you may find certain ST depression and inverted T wave in inferior wall. So what I mean to say is that, as we have already discussed, where to rub? Okay, I will just I'm pretty confused where to write. Suppose let's say oh my god, okay, I'll just add right here in this part. So what are the inferior leads? The inferior leads are, as we have already discussed, inferior leads here. So the AVF, so AVF and 3 is going like this, lead 3 and lead 2. Wait, let me draw one picture for you. So you see here, so the inferior leads are 3rd, AVF and 2. What we have already told is that when there is ST segment elevation and T wave upright in V1, V2, V3, V4, then you may find reciprocal relationship in case of inferior lead. So inferior lead means this 3, 2nd, 3rd and AVF. And in this case, what difference you can find is that you will find ST segment depression. So in case of AVF 3 and 2, you may find ECG like this. So this is here, and let's say, okay, so you see here, is it visible? Yes. So this is your PR segment, this is your isoelectric line, and you see here the ST segment is depressed and T wave it is inverted. So in inferior lead you will find the reciprocal relationship. So if there is occlusion above the level of S1 and D1, that is septal and diagonal artery, then you can find septal and anterior occlusion, and there may be septal and atrial MI. If there is septal V1 and V2, there will be more significant, and anterior V3 and V4. So ST segment and T wave upright, like this ECG you will be finding in V1, V2, V3 and V4. And if it involves a little bit higher region, then lateral part of the lateral wall might also be involved. And if lateral part is involved, then so you see here the lateral part. So AVL is also lateral part, and lead 1 is also lateral part, and we have already discussed B5 and B6 also the lateral part. So this is the basic funda. And now in this second part we will be discussing what will be the defect seen when there will be occlusion below S1 and D1. So if there will be S1 and D1, then this lateral supply will be spared. So there will not be any harm to lateral circumflex artery. So no changes in lateral leads, isn't it? And what are the lateral leads? So the lateral leads are, okay, tell me, V5, V6, I and AVL. So no changes will be seen in here. No significant ST segment elevation and operative wave will be seen. Then what will be the changes? The changes will be seen mostly in V3 and V4. Why? Because they are the anterior leads. They are the anterior leads. And if there is S2 blockage, then V1 and V2, of course, because septum will be involved. So what are the changes seen? In these cases, you will be seeing, so okay, so you see here, this is your IC electric line, this is your IC electric line, and this is the ST elevation, and this is the operative wave. However, we discussed in previous video that if occlusion is above S1 and D1, there will be seen reciprocal relation in case of inferior lead. But in this case, we won't be finding any reciprocal relationship. However, we will be finding same changes as seen in V3, V4, V1 and V2 in case of inferior lead also. What I mean to say is that in case of inferior lead also, there will be ST segment elevation. So what are the inferior leads? Again, you can see here in this diagram. So you can see here 3, AVF and 2. They are the inferior leads. So in inferior leads also you will be finding ST segment elevation and operative wave. So like this. So in case of lead 2, 3 and AVF also you will be finding ST segment elevation and operative wave. Why did you find this? Because there is a phenomenon called a wrap around phenomenon, where this LED goes downside, wraps around the inferior wall, and because of that occlusion will be there, and then because of that the ST segment elevation and operative wave will be seen. Okay, now third example. What are the changes that you seen when there is occlusion in proximal left coronary artery? Suppose occlusion is way high up here, suppose, let's say. So if occlusion is like that significant, then what will be the consequences? LED will also be occluded, left circumflex artery will also be occluded. When LED will be occluded, the septum and the inferior wall, anterior wall will be will get also occluded, and MI will be there, and the part of the left lateral border of the heart will also be involved, and if it is posterior, some degree of posterior part will also be involved, and if it is dominant, then inferior part will also be there. So where will be finding the changes? Anterior wall V3 and V4, and septal you can find V1 and V2. Lateral you can find in I, AVL, V5 and V6. And reciprocal relationship you can find. And then one important thing is that there is one lead called AVR. Generally this AVR sees the heart from inside. So this is your heart, the AVR sees from inside of the heart. Okay, so there will be also significant ST elevation in case of AVR. So if AVR ST segment elevation magnitude is greater than lead V1, then it is highly probable that this is the proximal most left coronary artery occlusion. So when you look at the AVR lead, you find the ST elevation and you compare with lead 1, and the ST elevation of AVR is greater than the ST elevation of lead 1, then lead V1, then you be sure that, or you suspect that there is proximal part of the left coronary artery is being occluded. Okay, now next example. In next example, we see, suppose left circumflex artery is only occluded. So if left circumflex artery is occluded, then what will happen? Septal part will be spared, it will be okay, spared. anterior wall will be spared, it will be okay, no changes, but lateral wall will be involved. So lateral wall will be involved. So lateral wall pathology is seen in lead 1 AV V6, isn't it? So significant ST segment elevation and T wave upright will be finding in case of 1 AVL V5 and V6.